in the last program, I was talking to you about the basic teachings of the Buddha, who lived in India about 623 years before Christ. And I'm going to devote this program to a development of the original doctrine of Buddhism, which is called Mahayana Buddhism. Maha means great in Sanskrit, and yana means something like vehicle or a conveyance. And Mahayana Buddhism is today found in the northern part of Asia, that is to say in Tibet, China, Mongolia, and Japan, and is contrasted with another form of Buddhism, which is properly called Theravada. That means the way of the elders, or the doctrine of the elders. Only it's impolitely known as Hinayana, the little vehicle. And this is found in the south of Asia, in Ceylon, Burma, Thailand, and Cambodia. And Mahayana developed in India probably somewhere between about 100 BC and 300 or 400 AD. This was the whole period of its germination. And what it really is a very profound philosophical elaboration of the Buddha's original teachings, drawing out certain things that were implicit in those teachings, if not actually stated, on the principle that if the original teachings are something like a seed, which has any vitality in it at all, it grows into a tree. And sometimes a tree doesn't look very much like its seed, although the tree was, of course, implicit in the seed from the beginning. Now, once upon a time, there was an old Chinese Buddhist master called Lin Chi. And he used to tell his disciples that he felt his duty towards them was to beat the ghosts out of them. And I pointed out to you last time that Buddhism is in a certain sense an awakening, waking up as it were from a bad dream, and in the sense that ghosts are something like a bad dream. There are, as it were, certain fixed ideas or habits of thought which, to use a slang phrase, bug the human mind and confuse us. And I was trying to explain one of them, which in Mahayana Buddhism has been very carefully investigated. And that is the idea that this world is not really what we call substantial. There is a theory in Mahayana Buddhism that is called the doctrine of mind only. And this isn't quite like Western ideas that we sometimes call subjective idealism. The idea, in other words, that the whole world is something that exists only in your own mind and there isn't any outside there, as it were, at all. It isn't quite like that. And I want to try in this program, among other things, to explain the difference. Now, the important point to understand from this was contained in the Buddha's original teaching is that the whole of our world of experience is an experience of pure pattern. Just, as it were, formation or process without any substantiality in it at all. A pattern of form constantly rippling and changing and shifting and always flowing, as it were, from one thing to another. Try and conceive then the idea of all the forms and things of the world as being form and nothing but form, and having, as it were, no stuff underneath its constantly shifting changes. This, of course, is a difficult idea for us to imagine because it's so contrary to our ordinary common sense. As I explained last time, we tend to think of our world by analogy with the potter's craft. Just as a potter makes pots out of clay, so we think of all the various things in the world, the mountains, the stars, the trees, people, and so on, as being made out of some stuff. But as we know from our own science, and as the old Buddhist philosophers knew in earlier times, we can perfectly well give an account of this world, describe it and talk about it, in terms of form alone, without ever having to introduce the concept of stuff. And that's only a difficult idea for us to understand because we have fixed habits of thought that make it seem strange to us when we try to clarify it. Now, this involves another idea that is common to all schools of Buddhism, which again, for the same reason, is difficult to understand. And this is called in Sanskrit the doctrine of An-Atman, A-N-A-T-M-A-N. And that means non-ego. That is to say, the doctrine that the feeling that we have of being I, a thinker behind thought, an experiencer behind experience, a feeler behind our feelings, and a sensor behind our sensations. That feeling is agreed by all schools of Buddhist thought to be an illusion. But you see, this immediately surprises us because it seems to be one of the most common sense feelings we could have. Not simply that I am I in the sense that I am my whole physical organism and body, but also to feel that there is some kind of permanent entity or center of consciousness inside the body, receiving all its experiences and being the main director of its actions, sitting in the body, as it were, like a chauffeur inside an automobile, or as if we had some sort of little man inside our heads. And so it does seem a fundamental, commonsensical idea that we, as ego, as I myself, as the knower, the little man inside the head, am a sort of screen upon which life is constantly writing a pattern. And we develop from this the fear that the writing of life upon the screen may wear the pattern out in the same way, for example, as if I were to write here upon the sand and begin to trace patterns in it. Now, as I go on writing, the sand begins to be scattered. And so in the same way, we have, as it were, the impression that the constant motion of life is wearing out the conscious knower, the ego. And therefore, we develop a kind of resistance to experience. But now, I think we ought to ask the question, is this true? Is experience something that happens to us, that we have? Or would it be more accurate to say that there is simply a process of experiencing? Again, the Buddhist philosophers of ancient India had realized something which we can perhaps see even more clearly as a result of our own scientific investigations of just what perception is in terms of our own nervous system. And it's rather simple to talk about this whole problem, shall we say, in terms of neurology. And this is not to say that our consciousness, our minds, are nothing but nerves, because that sounds like a kind of materialism. We have to understand that we don't know, as it were, what the nerves are in terms of some kind of material substance or mental substance. We can think of our nervous system simply as a pattern. Now, the important point to realize first is that all that we see in terms of an outside world, color, texture, shape, and so on, is going on inside our heads, going on inside our nervous system. So that when we, say, touch something and feel that it's hard, what we are actually experiencing is not so much the outside thing. It's true, the stimulus is coming from the outside world to our body. But what we actually feel and experience as hardness is a particular activity or process going on inside our nervous system. So that we could say all that our experience of the external world is felt directly only as an experience of the nervous system. And even that, in a way, is not quite correct, because when I say an experience of the nervous system, that what we are experiencing is a state of our nervous system, this still isn't a simple enough way of talking about it, because it sounds again as if there were, behind the nervous system itself, an experiencer. What we have to try and get clear is that our sensations are processes in the nervous system, and that those processes are us. The self is the process of sensation. In other words, there isn't a sensor behind sensation. When we have a sensation, we don't have it, we are it. And so it helps then if, first of all, we could think of the nervous system as being a pure pattern, something like the one I'm going to draw. I'm going to draw a pattern in 4 stages of its movement. So let's think of these as 4 positions in the movement of a kind of dancing pattern. The first, the second, the third, and the fourth. I've drawn them all out in a row, but one would see them just as one pattern constantly shifting around.